Welcome to the Lady Landlords podcast, where we empower women to gain financial independence through real estate investing. I'm your host, Becky Nova, founder of Lady Landlords. If you're ready to buy, manage, and grow your real estate portfolio, then let's get started. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. Today, I want to share with you exactly how I got started in real estate investing, and I want to walk you through that very first deal that I had. I totally understand that getting started can be confusing, difficult, and that there's really a learning curve to kind of getting into real estate investing. So hopefully by sharing my story about how I got started with that first property will also inspire you to be able to take action and get your first property now in 2023. So if you do not know my story about this, I actually never wanted to buy real estate. It was something I was just not wanting to do. I lived in Europe throughout my 20s. I really enjoyed it. I've always been a big person when it comes to traveling and living and seeing other cultures. I wanted to go back and move abroad again. But my husband, Emilio, when we were still dating, really wanted to buy a house. He had immigrated to the United States when he was 18 years old, and homeownership was just such a big goal for him. So as we do in relationships, we sometimes have to compromise. So I said, fine, we can buy a property, but if we're going to buy a property, we have to figure out how to not live mortgage payment to mortgage payment. I didn't want to be back in that world of living paycheck to paycheck. I wanted to find a way that we could really do this and make it a good financial decision for our family. So even though he was the one that wanted to buy property, I was the one that said, hey, I think we should buy a multifamily. Now, at the time, I thought I had the best, greatest, most fantastic idea ever to buy a multifamily, live in one side, and rent out the other. I had no idea that house hacking was a thing. I was not in this real estate investing world at all. This never even popped up on my radar. So if you're listening to this podcast, I got to say, you are 10 steps ahead of where I was when I got started. I really was just trying to find a way to not go broke buying a house in New York. So at the time, we were actually living in the Bronx, and we made the decision that that was actually the area we wanted to stay. Now, that was actually my choice. I did feel that there were a lot of changes going on in the Bronx. By that time, there were a lot of other areas of the city and the other boroughs that had already kind of taken off. You know, Brooklyn had just kind of gone through their revitalization. Prices really changed. Things were kind of moving, and that was really now going to impact the Bronx. I felt that it was really the only affordable borough that was kind of left. So since we lived there, it made sense. So we went and decided that that was where we were going to get started. Multifamily in the South Bronx. But from there, it was so confusing. Trying to figure out, like, do I call a lender first? Do I got to get pre-approved first? Do I call a realtor first? Do I find a property first? I had no idea how to do this. No one else in my family had actually owned property before. So how was I supposed to know how to do it? And my husband wasn't even from this country. That wasn't even something that he would have any idea of the process. He's looking at me, and yet I have nobody to look to even figure out how to get this process. So I did start calling around, and I remember I called so many different realtors in the South Bronx, asking to kind of get an understanding of the process. And to be honest, nobody wanted to talk to me. Everybody was just like, yeah, go get pre-approved, go pick a house off of Zillow, and then I'll sell it to you. But until you pick that house out and you already have that pre-approval in hand, we don't want to talk to you. Meanwhile, I was like, but how do I get pre-approved? How do I do that? How do I pick a house? And what do you mean just go to Zillow? Like, that was just there were just so many questions that I had leading up to that. And honestly, nobody was really willing to talk to us or give us that help. So we went through our own bank at the time, just got a pre-approval just to see if we even could get pre-approved. As many of you know my story, I had actually moved back from Europe just a few years before this and really had a lot of problems with debt, with horrible credit, that I was really afraid I wasn't even going to be able to get approved for a mortgage. Who was going to give me money after all that? But we were able to get pre-approved. And then, like I said, I kept trying to stay in with these realtors to get help. And I just really was getting nobody that would spend time or talk to us. Luckily, though, I'd reconnected with a friend of mine from high school, and his mom was a realtor. So I reached out to her on Facebook and asked if she knew anybody that well, first I asked if I could just pay her for her time to get questions answered because I knew she didn't cover the Bronx area. But luckily she said, hey, we actually have an agent in our office that's fantastic, focuses on working with first-time home buyers and is from the Bronx and would really know the area. So luckily she introduced me to Michael Torello. Michael Torello actually sat down with us, asked us questions, understood what we were looking for, and started showing us properties. We felt 100% better now having somebody on our side that can help us guide us through this process. He also put us in touch with the right lenders that we wanted to work with for the project for that first property and buying that multifamily owner occupied property. So now we were kind of off to the race here. We started looking in the Bronx just as we had planned, and it was weird just walking into properties, seeing what was there, and really like it took us the first few to just kind of get a feel of what we should be looking for and how we could really envision using that space, especially since this was something that we were going to be living in, but also that we were going to be renting out. But in the Bronx, honestly, I thought it was going to be a great opportunity zone. It apparently other people had the exact same idea because we were just getting blown out of the water with just cash buyers coming in, over ask. And we're talking back in 2018. This was not even these past couple of years. People were already going with these crazy waiving all contingencies, all cash offers back in 2018 in the Bronx. I remember the first property that Emilio and I found that we wanted to buy, and we thought this was like the best property ever. It was a really nice property, but we were so excited for this. We even like wrote letters to the sellers, letting them know that we wanted to buy it. We wrote letters in Spanish, just to make sure to see if we can kind of connect, and because we knew that there was a ton of competition for that property. That property went for $80,000 over our bid, and we were already over ask. And we just absolutely lost that. And I got to be honest, we were kind of crushed at that point. That was something that we had just so talked ourselves into that was the right property. What was actually interesting is looking back in hindsight, we were really trying to kind of fit, what is that saying? A square peg in a round hole. It didn't have the bedroom count that made sense for us. It didn't have the setup for tenants, landlord that we were really looking for. We really liked it, but honestly, if it was really kind of a blessing in disguise. If we had gotten that property, I don't know if we would be where we are now. And that means I don't know if there would actually have been a Lady Landlords. But once again, I guess luckily looking back on it, we didn't get that property. So we ended up seeing a few more, kind of went back to the drawing board for that. And it was actually at that time that there was a property that came up for availability in Yonkers. Now, Yonkers, New York is in Westchester County. Westchester County is where I grew up. I've lived in multiple states. I've lived in multiple countries. I did not want to be back in the same county where I grew up. That to me was like, oh, this was so not what I wanted. This was so not where I planned on. This was so not what I was looking to do. But there was an opportunity that came up for a property in Yonkers that kind of fit what our boxes were looking for. So I actually had to work that day, wasn't able to take off, but I really kind of just didn't care all too much. I was able to run my numbers, and I was able to see that this property would be beneficial for us from a financial perspective, where we could actually really pretty much live for free, if not even make some money off of being able to live. So I cared more about the numbers. I was happy with that, but I actually didn't even go see the property. My husband, Emilio, and our realtor, they went to go see the property. Now, I don't know if he's going to listen to this episode, but Emilio was a lot more picky than me. He was the one that really was looking for certain things in a home that I really kind of didn't care about. I've moved around so much in my life. I could really live out of a paper box. So I was not as strict on what I was looking for from a criteria perspective as much as Emilio was. So I was like, great. If he sees it, he likes it. I don't care. Numbers work for me. Let's go for it. So they went. He actually did take some videos of the property. It had been flipped by a couple people before. So the house was completely empty, completely remodeled, completely redone. So that seemed like it was going to really be a good fit for us because we had no idea how to do this work. We had never lived in homes before. We never owned homes before. So this was something that was going to be really unique for us. So we ended up moving forward with that property. Compared to those bidding wars that we were in the South Bronx, that first property, there was another offer on the table. It seemed, our guess was that that was a full ask offer. Emilio really did not want to have to go over ask again after all those properties in the Bronx, but the property itself was listed at $450. And we ended up offering and getting that property for $465 was the final price on that property. So we had gotten actually the accepted offer later that day. And then it was actually that night that when I got out of work that I took the train from the city up to Yonkers and walked around the neighborhood, and our realtor came back and then showed me the property. Now that I was in it, I was like, you know what, this actually was a good fit. What's interesting about this property is it is an attached townhouse. There are 4 townhouses on this block that are all attached. Ours is one of the ones in the middle, and it's a duplex. On the first floor, you have a 1-bedroom, 1-bath that walks out to a little backyard, and outside space was really important for me. For anybody that's lived in Manhattan for any period of time, you know how valuable outside space was. So that was really something that was important to us. And then upstairs, the other apartment was a 3-bedroom, 1.5-bath duplex. Okay, so there's actually a set of stairs inside that unit. So we have a duplex inside of our duplex. So that was a large unit, and it's gorgeous, but we really just didn't need the space. It was just Emilio and I. So it didn't make space for us to take the larger apartment. We just really needed that 1-bedroom, and it worked out because in that way we also had that outside space. So it actually worked. We didn't feel like then we were living in the larger unit where we could actually rent that for more. So what ended up being great about that is since we only needed the small space and could rent out the larger space, that meant we were able to bring in the larger rent from that. So that rent actually covered our entire mortgage payment. So now we went from paying, thousands of dollars to live in the city, to live in Manhattan. I used to have, I'll take you back on this, in 2016, 2015, I lived in a studio apartment. Studio. I'm talking where like from my bed, I could see my toilet and my kitchen. Studio apartment. And I paid $2,000 a month. I'm just stopping there to like let you all absorb that. $2,000 a month, not even including utilities, not even including utilities for that apartment. I can't even imagine actually what that studio would be like where I lived on the Upper East Side in Manhattan now 8 years later. But then when we were living in the Bronx, our cost of living was much cheaper, right? We definitely lived in an area that rents were just much less, but even eliminating what that rent was huge. So now all of a sudden we were able to buy a home and live for free. That was crazy to be able to do that to us. So we were happy that the unit count kind of like worked with what we were looking for in the bedroom count for allowing us to live in that smaller space. So at the time, we did an owner-occupied mortgage. I think when we put down, if I remember correctly, it cost us all in between closing costs, down payment, the inspection, the survey we had to do. It probably cost us in total about $80,000 to make that first purchase. 80 grand. I got to think back on that now. If only I knew the things that I knew now that I had known, if I had known those things back then, I got to say there was probably a better way that I could have done that. There is a better way I could have done that. But that first property for us, that was $80,000 that we put in to buy that house for just under $500,000 with an owner occupied. But what was great about it, as I said, is it eliminated our cost of living. So not only were we able to kind of bring in a couple $100 from that property, but we were now living for free, which meant that $1,000 that we were living to pay in the Bronx was actually stuff that I could really put back in my savings. So now I had the house with equity that's appreciating. Now I have the tenants rent coming in that's paying for me to live, and it's allowing me to then to rebuild up my savings. So this for us was really a win-win on that property. So we went, We're all excited. We now get to the closing table. So looking forward to be able to move into this property. Numbers all worked. We were really happy with it. Actually, let me take a step back. Let me tell you about the home inspection. So we now got that accepted offer, but we understand that other people could still make offers. We're not in contract. So here in New York, once you get your accepted offer, you do your inspection, then you get into contract. So it was on a Friday that we'd gotten the accepted offer, and I'd first seen that property. Then on Monday, we had the inspection scheduled. So same thing, that inspection's scheduled for the afternoon. And I'm on the train going back up to go see it now, to go meet our inspector. And Emilio calls me. He had driven to the property and he got there before me. And he goes, "Hey, Becky, I don't know how to tell you this, but our house was vandalized." And I'm like, what do you mean it was vandalized? And he goes, check your messages. I just sent you some pictures. He sent us a picture, and on this brick townhouse, hot orange spray paint with racial epitaphs all over it. All over it. We were like, what are we going to do with this? So I, of course, on the train, I'm calling my realtor and I'm telling him what happened, and he's calming me down. Then I made the really big mistake of calling my mother. And I told my mom what was written all over this house. And she just automatically was like, "That's it. You're not buying this. Get out," right? Doing the complete mother protective responsibility that she had. But I was like looking at the pictures and I'm like, it was just a weird handwriting that this was in. It was that very bubbly writing. I felt like almost over like these horrible words that you never ever say out loud. I felt like you could almost like picture like the little heart over the eye, because it was just such like this like bubbly handwriting. It was so odd to me. So we get up to the house and our home inspector was kind of like, "So what are we doing, guys?" Emilio and I kind of looked at each other and we're like, we're going to move forward, right? Like, okay, we'll move forward. So we go through and we do the inspection. By the time the inspection ended, the police were there, and they actually ended up having to call the fire department to power wash the racial epitaphs from the spray paint off of this property. So that was our first experience in the neighborhood. We were able to actually meet some of the neighbors, which were interesting. It was great to kind of get to know them and have them kind of meet us. But it was such an odd situation. So I'll never forget, the following day, there was a snowstorm here in New York, and I was home from work, and I had the news on about the snow. And all of a sudden, our local news, there's a news story about the house in Yonkers that was vandalized with racial epitaphs. And I'm looking at it and I call my realtor and I'm like, "Oh my God, Michael, what are we going to do?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, now our house, we're not in contract yet, and this great deal of a property is all over the news." And he kind of calms me down and he was like, "Becky, I'm quite sure there's not going to be a lot of competition for a house that was just vandalized." And I was like, "What do you mean? But it's such a good deal." And he was like, "Most people are probably not going to want to buy that house." Meanwhile, I was so afraid we were going to lose it, because now I felt like this was like free advertising. But luckily, we still got the house, went into contract a couple days later, and now we just had to get to the closing table. And here's something that I want to share with you. So another fun story here. When we went to the closing, we did the very typical, we did the walkthrough the morning of, and there were a couple things that had come up during the walkthrough. So we got to the house, we told our attorney, we told their attorney, and it was like, okay, great. The seller agreed, cool, not a problem. I'll send my guy out tomorrow, the day after the closing, send my guy out tomorrow and we'll get those things fixed. So we said, not a problem. We go through, we're signing, and if you've ever been to a closing table, they just give you documents after documents after documents to sign. So I'm one of those people that actually reads what I sign. So as I'm looking through this paperwork, when I get to the one that says what my mortgage payment's going to be, my mortgage payment was like $1,000 higher than what was agreed upon and what I went through with my lender. And I was like, no, I'm not signing this document. Someone needs to explain to me why this is $1,000 higher. My attorney's just like, no, it's fine. Just sign it. I'm like, no, like I need a reason and understanding of why this is different. So no one's giving me an answer. Title company can't answer my questions. The bank attorney, no one can answer why all of a sudden my mortgage payment is that much higher. So our closing, and closings usually go for like an hour, maybe an hour and a half. This turns into a 4-hour closing. I actually probably could never imagine another closing that had that much cursing in it, because everybody was just arguing about what to do, why this was, but nobody had an answer. So after those hours of fighting back and forth about what the mortgage payment was supposed to be, how much money we were putting down, what the interest rate was, checking all of our numbers again, we come to find out that there was a problem with the taxes. So, okay, so we're told, don't worry, like that'll get set out. That's going to get straightened out. That's just really a formality, and that we can move forward. So we take the advice of our attorney, we close, and that's it. Well, then the next day, we now own the house. So the seller, I have to say, did a great job and did send out his contractor. Remember, he was a flipper. So he had guys on his crew, and they came out to take care of the leaks in the property. So there was a leak. Remember, we're talking about a townhouse. There are 4 floors to this townhouse. Well, come to find out that the leak is actually running through all 4 floors of the property. And just so happens that the following day, we are now having water running through our electric panel. Emilio and I bought a house less than 24 hours before. We had never owned property before, and we have water coming through an electric panel. Do we call a plumber? Do we call an electrician? We have no idea. I'm just calling my mother, who already told me not to buy this house. So that's clearly not going very well. But the contractor called the seller and said, hey, listen, the problem with this leak through these 4 floors is really just something above my pay grade. You really need to hire a plumber. The seller goes, no, I'm not spending more money on a plumber. I already sold the house. You fix it, contractor. Contractor apparently goes, well, I'm owed thousands of dollars more, so I'm not doing any more work until you pay me. Seller goes, I'm not paying you any more money. Contractor leaves, seller's not doing anything. I'm now left with 4 floors of a leak. What do we do? So we ended up having to call, find our own plumber, get them out. They had to rip open 4 floors to get this leak fixed. What ended up happening is when the seller was flipping the house on 4 floors, instead of taking things downstairs or putting the little chute outside that window when they were doing demolition, the construction guys were just flushing the drywall and anything else that they did not want from those top floors of the apartment. They were just flushing it down the toilet, and it wasn't going down. So they had to open the pipes and walls and floors on all 4 floors and had to open up everything. The picture that I have of just crap, literally and figuratively, covering 4 floors of this house within 48 hours of us buying this property was ridiculous. Emilio already is like, this is horrible. This is not what I wanted to buying a house. We're trying to get this fixed. Now we're coming thousands of dollars out. But remember, we still have that whole tax issue to now deal with. So we come to find out that the day before we closed, that there was a lien put on the taxes. Now, what had happened was when the seller was flipping this house, he chose for the 4 years that he had owned that property to never pay the water bill. Never. I remember I mentioned that leak of water. So there was a $7,000 water bill owed to the city that they just never paid. The day before we closed, it just happened to be put as a lien on our taxes. And that title company never did the check they were supposed to on bills and on liens on taxes, which is supposed to be done right before you close. So we now have literally crap through 4 floors of this house. We are paying thousands of dollars to a plumber after spending everything we had on just buying the house. And I have to somehow find a litigator to now sue possibly the seller, the title company, my own actual attorney, to be able to fix the lien that is now on my taxes. This was not exactly the place that we expected to be after buying that first property. I got to be honest, Emilio was like, oh, we are never doing this again. We're never buying more houses. This is horrible. His whole American dream had been crushed in just a few hours of buying this property. But not mine. Not mine. Because what we were able to do is we were able to get through those things. I've always seen real estate investing as really just having to be a really good problem solver. And that's something that I know is one of my really good strong suits. So we had that plumber come and we got that leak fixed. We started with the top floors where the rental property was, because I wanted to get tenants in there ASAP so I can start generating income. I didn't care about my floor. I didn't care about the basement. I cared about making sure that we were able to get us to a safe, livable place where then we can get that apartment cleaned up and I can actually start showings, because I knew it was going to take me a little while to get that rented. So we got that problem solved. Fine. We had to pay for it. I knew I was getting my money back. One way or another, somebody else was paying for the mistake. So then the next thing that I had to do was to find the right person that could fix not only the issue with the cost that we had to come out with for the leaks, but now also I had to get this tax lien fixed. So I was happy to find an amazing attorney, all through networking, all through that networking that we all as real estate investors really need to be focusing on. And this is exactly why. This is how I found my attorney, Jay Zimner. Jay, I will never forget the first phone call that I had with him. And I had already been calling around other attorneys, got other referrals, trying to figure out who I can work with. And I remember Jay telling me that he sees his role as getting to make people that did something wrong's life miserable. And I was like, oh, this is the attorney that I want for this. This is the attorney that I'm going to need. So he now came on board with this. We were able to get the title company to admit fault, and they actually gave us that $7,000 for the water bill to get that lien off our taxes. He also coached me through going through small claims for the leaks on the house. We ended up suing our attorney because she did not advise us correctly on the purchase of the home. Between all of the issues with the house, she still advised us to close, and she never advised us to have any money put in escrow, which would have helped keep the seller responsible and also financially responsible for the issues still with the house, even if we still chose to close. So that was actually the first lawsuit that I was able to win in small claims, but it was really thanks to our attorney's advisement on going through that process. And lastly, we still had that little case of vandalism. Now, we didn't own the house, so that was not something that we were privy to what happened in that case. But just as kind of a wrap up for what had happened there, it turned out that our neighbors had security cameras. And those security cameras caught people that were vandalizing our property that day of that home inspection. It ended up being, wait for it, the people that lost the bidding war. The people that we were competing with against the house that did not get the house were so upset that they did not get the property that they went and vandalized our house. So after all of that, I still was never deterred from buying more real estate. It was even within just that first property and lowering our own cost of living, being able to bring in that extra money from the rent payments and having that equity in the house that I said, you know what? This is an absolute game changer. This can absolutely change our financial future as a family for generations to come. And this is something we need to do again. So we did. We bought our next property, a 4-family and a parking lot, exactly 1 year to the date of that first property. But I'm going to leave that story for another episode. Please do make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and not miss the next episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today to learn about my first property. I cannot wait to hear the stories about how you got your first property. So if you listen to this, I would love if you would either leave a review or a comment below about how you got your first property, or come tell us the story in the Lady Landlords Facebook group. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you next week on the next episode of the Lady Landlords podcast.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're feeling stuck in your real estate journey, visit lady-landlords.com to book a one-on-one workshop with me. I'll help you determine your next best strategy. Or you could subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive tips and offers. Invest with confidence. Become a lady landlord today.